Greetings, wanderers of the night. I'm the Keeper of Tales, here to guide you into a world of dreams. I know you've come to this video to drift off into sleep, so before we begin, give it a gentle like and join the circle by subscribing. Tell me, where are you resting tonight, and what hour glows on your clock? Settle in, let the worries fade, and surrender to the calm. The Phantom Blade of Thornwick Hollow. Deep in the Yorkshire Dales of northern England, Thornwick Hollow is a secluded valley where twisted oaks and jagged limestone cliffs guard a forgotten battlefield. The hollow is a place of eerie stillness, its air heavy with the memory of blood and steel. Locals in the nearby village of Grassington whisper of a spectral clash that echoes through the mist, the clash of swords heard when fog blankets the hollow. Tales speak of wanderers who glimpsed a fleeting duel beneath the oaks, only to find no trace of combatants. To ramblers, Thornwick Hollow is a rugged beauty spot. To those who know its past, it is a place where honor and betrayal clash eternal. In the autumn of 2022, Oliver Grant, a 39-year-old park ranger from Leeds, was assigned to survey Thornwick Hollow for trail maintenance. A stoic man with a love for the outdoors and a disdain for ghost stories, Oliver saw the local legends as fanciful tales spun to scare hikers. On a foggy October morning, he arrived with a clipboard, a GPS device, and a thermos of coffee. The hollow shrouded in a thick mist that muffled his footsteps. The oaks loomed like specters, their branches clawing at the sky, and the limestone cliffs glistened with dew. As he marked a trail, a faint metallic clink, like steel striking steel, broke the silence. Assuming it was a loose rock or a hiker's gear, Oliver scanned the hollow, seeing only fog and trees. The clink grew sharper, joined by a low grunt of effort, as if two men were locked in combat. His curiosity piqued. He followed the sound toward a clearing beneath the largest oak, where the mist swirled unnaturally, forming eddies that seemed to pulse with intent. The air grew taut, and a sharp, cold gust carried the scent of iron and sweat. Oliver's GPS flickered, its screen glitching, and the clinking became a furious clash, punctuated by a cry of rage. He gripped his clipboard, heart racing, as the fog parted to reveal a glint of metal. A sword, lying half buried in the earth, its blade etched with intricate runes. Compelled to touch it, Oliver reached for the sword, but as his fingers grazed the hilt, the clearing erupted in motion. Two figures materialized from the mist, clad in 18th century garb, one in a tattered red coat, the other in a dark cloak, their swords locked in a deadly dance. The red-coated man, his face scarred and furious, parried a blow from his cloaked opponent, whose eyes burned with betrayal. Their blades sparked, and the ground beneath Oliver trembled, as if the hollow itself were reliving their fury. The cloaked man staggered, clutching his chest, and his gaze met Oliver's, a silent accusation that froze him in place. With a final clash, the figures vanished, the sword dissolved into mist, and the hollow fell silent, the fog lifting to reveal an empty clearing. Shaken, Oliver stumbled back to Grassington, seeking answers at the village inn. There, an old blacksmith, Thomas, shared a tale of 1745, during the Jacobite Rising. Two brothers, Alistair and Duncan, swore loyalty to opposing sides, one to the crown, one to the Stuarts. Their feud culminated in a duel in Thornwick Hollow, where Alistair, the elder, struck down Duncan in a fit of rage, only to die of his own wounds days later. The brothers' swords were buried with them, but the hollow, Thomas said, replayed their betrayal for those who disturbed its peace, the blade a conduit for their unending strife. Oliver returned to Leeds, his survey unfinished, the clash of swords echoing in his mind. He reviewed his GPS data, finding a single anomaly, a brief video clip recorded unintentionally, showing a faint blur of two figures beneath the oak, though he'd seen no one when it was captured. He avoided Thornwick Hollow thereafter, but the weight of that glance lingered. Some say the hollow traps the brothers' fury, their duel a wound that bleeds through the mist. Others, like Oliver, wonder if the valley is a stage where time replays its darkest oaths, waiting for hands to touch the blade that binds them, the midnight call. This happened to me last winter. I had just moved into a new apartment in a quiet part of the city. It was an old building, with narrow hallways and peeling wallpaper, the kind of place that felt a little forgotten by time. I didn't mind it. I liked the solitude. One night I was already in bed, trying to sleep after a long week at work. It was just past midnight when my phone rang. I remember looking at the screen, expecting to see a call from a friend, or maybe a family member. But there was no name, just a number, a string of digits that didn't look familiar at all. I hesitated before picking it up. I wasn't expecting anyone, but curiosity got the best of me, and I swiped to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice still thick with sleep. The other end was completely silent. No sounds at all. I waited for a moment, thinking it might be a wrong number or a telemarketer. But then, I heard something. A faint breathing, slow, deep, almost like it was being forced. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. No one spoke. "Hello?" I said again, my voice now more alert, but still no response. I was just about to hang up when a whisper came through the line. It wasn't a word, just a sound. A soft, guttural hum, like someone trying to speak, but unable to form real words. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. But then, there it was again. The whisper, louder this time. "Help me." The voice was raspy, almost strained, and it sent a wave of unease washing over me. I gripped the phone tighter, my thoughts racing. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. The line went dead. I checked my phone. The call had ended. But the thing was, the screen didn't show that it had been a missed call. It was as if no one had called at all. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I checked the number, but it didn't match anything in my contacts. It wasn't from anyone I knew. I tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to my imagination playing tricks on me in the dark. But something about it didn't sit right. The voice, the way it sounded so close, yet so far away. I tried to go back to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the number on my phone. My mind kept replaying the whisper, "Help me," over and over. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. I looked at the screen, heart pounding. The same number. I didn't want to pick it up, but I couldn't stop myself. I answered, breath catching in my throat. This time, the voice was clearer, almost desperate. "You shouldn't have answered." I didn't say anything. I just hung up, immediately. But that wasn't the end of it. The calls kept coming, at random hours during the night, always from that same strange number. Sometimes the voice was just breathing. Other times, it would whisper something. "Don't sleep," or "I see you." Each call made my skin crawl, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. I tried blocking the number, but it didn't help. The calls kept coming, from different numbers, sometimes even with no number at all. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my things and moved out of that apartment. But even now, I get the occasional call. Each time I answer, there's only silence, or that same whisper, "Help me." And I can't help but wonder, was I ever supposed to hear it? The Lost Locket of Sorrow's Beck. Tucked away in the rolling hills of County Antrim, Northern Ireland, Sorrow's Beck is a narrow stream that winds through a secluded glen, its banks lined with ancient hawthorn trees and crumbling dry stone walls. The beck is a place of quiet unease, its waters said to carry the echoes of a child's cry, heard only when the moon is hidden. Locals in the nearby village of Glenarm whisper of a locket lost in the stream, its gleam drawing wanderers to the water's edge, only to leave them with a weight they cannot shake. To passers-by, Sorrow's Beck is a serene brook. To those who linger, it is a place where a mother's grief ripples through time. In the summer of 2023, Fiona Kelly, a 31-year-old librarian from Belfast, visited Sorrow's Beck to escape the bustle of city life. A reserved woman with a fondness for local history, Fiona was intrigued by the Glen's folklore, but saw it as charming myth, not reality. On a warm June afternoon, she arrived with a picnic basket, a book on Irish legends, and a small journal to jot down thoughts. The beck sparkled under the sun, its shallow waters gurgling over smooth pebbles, and the hawthorns bloomed with creamy blossoms. Settling on a flat stone by the stream, Fiona began reading, the gentle ripple of the water soothing her nerves. As the afternoon waned, a glint in the beck caught Fiona's eye, a flash of silver beneath the surface, like a coin or jewel. Thinking it was a lost trinket, she leaned closer, dipping her hand into the icy water. Her fingers brushed something smooth and metallic, but as she grasped it, a sharp, childlike wail pierced the air, high and desperate. Startled, Fiona yanked her hand back, the object slipping away. The wail grew louder, joined by a woman's anguished sob, both sounds emanating from the stream itself. Her heart pounding, Fiona scanned the glen, seeing no one, but the air turned heavy, laden with a sorrow that pressed against her chest. Drawn by an inexplicable urge, Fiona waded into the beck, the cold biting her ankles. The glint reappeared, and this time she retrieved it, a small heart-shaped locket, its surface engraved with a Celtic knot, tarnished, but intact. As she held it, the wail intensified, and the water around her seemed to shimmer, revealing a fleeting vision. A young girl in a 19th century dress, clutching the locket, her face streaked with tears, while a woman in a shawl knelt beside her, reaching out in vain. The girl's lips moved, forming the word "Mama." Before the scene dissolved, the beck returning to its tranquil flow. Fiona stumbled to the bank, the locket clutched in her trembling hand, the cries fading, but their weight lingering in her heart. Shaken, Fiona sought answers in Glenarm, finding an old seamstress, Bridget, who knew the beck's lore. Over a flickering hearth, Bridget recounted a tragedy from 1847 during the Great Famine. A widow named Saoirse, starving and desperate, sent her daughter, Nia, to a wealthy landowner for aid, giving her a locket as a token of their bond. Nia never returned, lost to fever or worse, and Saoirse, consumed by guilt, drowned herself in the beck, searching for her child. The locket, Bridget said, was a beacon, drawing those who touched it into Niamh's final plea, a moment of loss frozen in the stream's current. Fiona returned to Belfast, the locket locked in a drawer, but its presence unsettled her. She photographed it for her journal, and one image, taken by the beck, showed a faint outline of a girl's hand reaching from the water, though no such figure was visible at the time. Fiona donated the locket to a local museum, unable to bear its sorrow, but she felt Niamh's cry in quiet moments. Some say Sorrow's Beck holds the grief of Saoirse and Niamh, its waters replaying their parting for those who find the locket. Others, like Fiona, wonder if the stream is a mirror of lost love, reflecting a moment that binds the living to the dead, the forgotten feast of Hollow Vale. In the shadowed heart of County Galway, Ireland. Hollow Vale is a windswept hollow where the River Corrib bends around a cluster of ancient yew trees, their gnarled roots clutching the earth like skeletal hands. The vale is a place of quiet dread, its mossy stones and sunken paths avoided by locals who murmur of a cursed banquet that never ends. Tales persist of travelers hearing laughter and clinking glasses on moonless nights, only to find the vale empty, its air thick with the scent of decay. To visitors, Hollow Vale is a picturesque relic. To those in nearby Ballinasloe, it is a place where the dead dine in silence. In the spring of 2022, Liam Walsh, a 42-year-old accountant from Dublin, visited Hollow Vale to settle a family matter. His late uncle had left him a small plot of land nearby, and Liam, ever practical, saw the trip as a chance to assess its value. A man of numbers, not superstitions, he scoffed at the village pub's warnings about the Vale, chalking them up to rural exaggeration. On a damp April evening, armed with a flashlight and a surveyor's map, he drove to the hollow, parking near a stone bridge that marked its edge. The yews loomed in the twilight, their branches swaying despite the still air, and a faint mist curled along the riverbank. As Liam surveyed the land, noting boundaries under the beam of his flashlight, he caught a whiff of something odd. Roasted meat and spiced wine, as if a feast were nearby. Puzzled, he followed the scent toward the yews, where the ground dipped into the vale's heart. There, beneath the trees, he saw a flickering glow, like candlelight, spilling from an open space he hadn't noticed before. As he approached, the scent grew stronger, mingled now with a sour note of rock. A low hum of voices, jovial, then strained, reached his ears, accompanied by the clatter of plates. Assuming a local gathering, Liam called out, but the sounds ceased abruptly, leaving only the river's murmur. Curiosity overriding caution, Liam stepped into the clearing. Before him stood a long oaken table, set for a grand banquet. Silver goblets, platters of steaming food, and chairs, filled with figures in tattered finery, their faces pale and hollow. At the table's head sat a man in a velvet doublet, his eyes sunken, raising a goblet in a silent toast. The guests mirrored him, their movements mechanical, their lips moving without sound. Liam's flashlight wavered as he noticed the food: molded bread, rancid meat, wine clouded with sediment. Yet the figures ate, their jaws grinding in eerie unison. A woman in a frayed gown turned to him, her gaze empty, and pointed to an empty chair, as if inviting him to join. Panic seized Liam. He backed away, but the ground seemed to shift, the yews closing in like a cage. The table glowed brighter, and the figures' silent feast grew frenzied, their hands tearing at the spoiled food, their eyes now fixed on him. A chilling realization hit. The chair was meant for him. He bolted, tripping over roots, the laughter resuming behind him, now cold and mocking. When he reached his car, gasping, he glanced back. The veil was dark, the glow gone, the scent vanished. His flashlight showed only muddy footprints, but his map, dropped in the chaos, was missing. Shaken, Liam sought answers at the pub, where an old farmer, Seamus, shared a grim tale. In the 1690s, during the Williamite War, a wealthy merchant hosted a lavish feast in Hollow Vale to celebrate a truce. But betrayal poisoned the night. Rival clans, invited as guests, massacred the host and his kin, leaving the table untouched. The bodies were buried in unmarked graves, and the Vale was shunned, its feast said to replay for those who disturbed its rest. Seamus warned that joining the table meant joining the dead, a fate Liam had narrowly escaped. Liam sold the land without returning, but the memory clung to him. Weeks later, sorting his uncle's belongings, he found an old sketch of a banquet, the table and figures identical to those in the Vale, though the paper was dated 1701. He burned it, unable to bear its weight. Some say Hollow Vale traps the betrayed, their feast a curse that ensnares the unwary. Others, like Liam, wonder if the Vale is a stage where history's wounds replay, waiting for one more guest to claim its empty seat. The silent bell of Dunraven Crag. Perched on the rugged cliffs of Pembrokeshire, Wales, Dunraven Crag overlooks the churning waters of the Celtic Sea, its windswept slopes dotted with the ruins of a medieval chapel. The crag is a place of stark beauty, but locals in the nearby village of St. Bride's speak of it with unease, claiming the chapel's bell, long since removed, still tolls on stormy nights, heralding sorrow. Tales abound of sailors who heard its phantom chime before their ships met the rocks below, and of walkers who felt an inexplicable pull toward the cliff's edge. To most, Dunraven Crag is a scenic overlook. To those who know its secrets, it is a place where grief lingers like salt in the air. In the winter of 2020, Megan Price, a 34-year-old marine biologist from Cardiff, visited Dunraven Crag to study coastal erosion for a university project. A pragmatic woman with little patience for ghost stories, Megan saw the crag's legends as romantic embellishments, likely spread to draw tourists. She arrived on a blustery February afternoon, her backpack laden with surveying tools, a thermos of tea, and a waterproof notebook. The chapel ruins were bleak but striking, their stone walls weathered by centuries of salt and wind, the bell tower reduced to a jagged stump. As she measured the cliff's retreat, the sea roared below, and gulls wheeled overhead. As dusk approached, the wind grew fiercer, carrying a faint metallic hum that Megan assumed was the creak of her tripod in the gale. She packed her equipment, ready to leave, but the hum sharpened into a single, resonant clang, like a bell struck once and left to fade. Startled, she scanned the ruins, seeing nothing but shadows and stone. The sound came again, clearer now, echoing from the tower's empty frame. Her scientific mind raced for explanations, a loose metal fragment perhaps, or vibrations from the cliffs. But the clang repeated, steady and deliberate, each toll heavier than the last. Uneasy, Megan approached the tower, her flashlight beam cutting through the gathering dark. At the tower's base, the air grew thick, as if pressing against her chest. The bell's tolls slowed, and between them, she heard a low, anguished moan, unmistakably human. Her flashlight flickered, revealing a fleeting shape in the tower's arch. A woman in a hooded cloak, her hands clutching an invisible rope, her face pale and etched with despair. The woman's lips moved, forming silent words, and her eyes locked onto Megan's with a plea that sent a shiver down her spine. The next toll was deafening, and Megan stumbled back, her flashlight dying. When she fumbled it back on, the woman was gone, and the bell's chime had stopped, leaving only the howl of the wind. Shaken, Megan fled to St. Bride's, seeking refuge in a small cafe. Over a steaming mug, she recounted her experience to the cafe owner, an elderly man named David, whose eyes darkened at her words. He shared a story passed down through generations. In the 14th century, during a brutal storm, a ship carrying the village's men foundered off Dunraven Crag. The chapel's bell ringer, a widow named Gwenllian, rang the bell frantically to guide them home. But the storm drowned her efforts, and all aboard perished, including her only son. Overcome with guilt, Gwenllian climbed the tower and leapt to her death, her final toll echoing as she fell. Since then, her bell is said to ring before storms, her spirit forever trying to save those she could not. Megan returned to Cardiff, her data incomplete, but her perspective altered. She reviewed her photos from the crag, expecting nothing unusual, but one image, taken near the tower, showed a faint, misty outline of a cloaked figure, invisible when she'd clicked the shutter. She never spoke of Dunraven Crag again, but the toll of that bell haunted her thoughts, especially on stormy nights. Some say Gwenllian's grief is bound to the crag, her bell a warning etched into the stone. Others, like Megan, wonder if the cliffs hold a fragment of her despair, ringing out across time to those who stand too close to the edge. The figure on the highway. This happened last winter, when I was driving back home after visiting my parents. It was late, sometime after midnight, and the highway was almost completely empty. Just a long, endless stretch of dark road, cutting through frozen fields. The weather had turned ugly. It had started snowing heavily, and the wind pushed the flakes across the road in swirling, ghostly patterns. My headlights barely cut through the storm, and I found myself gripping the wheel tighter, leaning forward, squinting into the white blur ahead. I was maybe 30 minutes from home when I first saw it. At the edge of the road, just beyond the shoulder, there was a figure. I caught it in a quick flash. A person, standing completely still in the snow. No car nearby, no movement, just standing there, staring. I felt a jolt of adrenaline, but before I could really react, I had already passed them. I thought maybe they needed help, that maybe their car had broken down somewhere behind the trees. I slowed down, debating whether I should turn around, but something about it felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. I kept driving. About 10 minutes later, I saw them again. Same figure, same spot, just off the side of the road, as if they had somehow gotten ahead of me, even though there were no exits, no cross streets, nothing but forest on either side. I was going 60 miles an hour. There was no way they could have walked, let alone run, that distance through knee-deep snow in the time it took me to get there. This time, I got a better look. They were wearing something dark, a coat, or maybe a cloak, but their face, it was pale, almost glowing against the darkness, and they were staring straight at me as I passed, not waving, not signaling for help, just standing, watching. The temperature inside my car felt like it dropped 10 degrees. I didn't slow down this time. I pressed harder on the gas, heart pounding, eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was a trick of the snow, the lights, my own exhausted mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. About 5 minutes from my town, I reached a long, curved stretch of highway where a single, battered old sign warned of deer crossing. I was just starting to relax when I saw something move ahead. Something stepping into the road. For a split second, I thought it was a deer. It wasn't. It was the figure. Standing directly in the middle of my lane, arms at their sides, staring right at me. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching on the icy pavement. The car fishtailed, sliding sideways, and I gripped the wheel, trying to avoid spinning out. When the car finally skidded to a stop, I looked up, expecting to see them inches from my hood. But there was nothing there. The road was empty. No figure, no tracks, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. I sat there for a long moment, breathing hard, the snow pounding against the windshield. Then I slowly pulled back onto the road and drove home, refusing to look into the rearview mirror, no matter how badly I wanted to. I didn't take that highway for months afterward, and sometimes, even now, when I'm driving at night, I get the feeling that someone's standing just off the side of the road, waiting. The storm's call of Kilmary Point. I've never been one for ghost stories, but Kilmary Point, a jagged outcrop on the west coast of the Isle of Mull, Scotland, changed that. The point is a lonely place, where cliffs drop into the Atlantic, and sea spray clings to the air like a shroud. Locals in Tobermory talk of a storm that never dies, its winds howling the name of a sailor lost to the deep. They say if you stand too long at the point's edge, you'll hear his voice, begging for rescue. I thought it was just island folklore, the kind spun to keep kids from the cliffs. That was before I went there myself. In the winter of 2023, I, Rachel Harper, a 35-year-old freelance writer from Glasgow, came to Mull for a travel piece on its hidden gems. I'm a city girl, more at home with coffee shops than cliffs, but the promise of a quiet retreat lured me to Kilmary Point. I arrived on a gray January morning, my notebook tucked in my coat, a camera slung around my neck, and a flask of tea to ward off the chill. The point was as wild as I'd heard. Waves crashing against black rocks, gulls screaming overhead, and a lone standing stone etched with faded Celtic knots, marking the cliff's edge. I scribbled notes about the view, dismissing the locals' tales as poetic nonsense. As noon crept closer, the sky darkened, and a wind kicked up, sharp enough to sting my cheeks. I was about to head back when I heard it. A low, keening wail, not the wind but something human, rising from the sea below. I froze, my pen hovering over my notebook. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the gale. The wail came again, clearer now, a man's voice, hoarse and desperate. "Help me." My stomach twisted. I edged toward the cliff, peering down at the churning waves, but saw nothing. No boat, no swimmer, just foam and rock. Thinking it was my imagination, I turned away. But the wind roared, and the wail became a plea. "Don't leave me." My heart hammered. I fumbled for my camera, snapping a photo of the sea, hoping to capture something, anything, to explain the voice. That's when the air changed, growing heavy, like a storm about to break. The standing stone hummed, a vibration I felt in my bones, and the wind whipped into a frenzy, carrying the scent of salt and something fouler, like rotting seaweed. I stumbled back, but the world blurred, and for a moment, I wasn't on the cliff anymore. I saw him, a man in a tattered oilskin, clinging to a splintered mast, his face gaunt, his eyes wide with terror as waves swallowed him. He reached out, his lips forming my name, Rachel, though I'd never seen him before. The vision shattered, and I was back on the point, gasping, the stone silent, the wind calm. I ran to my car, my hands shaking as I drove to Tobermory. At a harborside cafe, I spilled my story to an old fisherman, Angus, whose weathered face grew grim. He told me of 1879, when a fishing boat, the Island Dhu, sank off Kilmorey Point in a brutal storm. The captain, Eamon, was the only survivor, washed ashore, but broken by guilt for failing his crew. He returned to the point daily, calling for his lost men, until one night he vanished, presumed drowned in his grief. Angus said Eamon's spirit lingers, his storm summoning those who stand at the point, seeking aid he can never give. Back in Glasgow, I uploaded my photos, dreading what I'd find. One image, taken at the cliff's edge, showed a faint, translucent figure in the waves, his arm outstretched, though the sea was empty when I clicked the shutter. I deleted it, unable to look at his face. I haven't returned to Mull, but Eamon's voice echoes in my quiet moments, a plea I can't answer. Some say Kilmorey Point traps his torment, its storms replaying his final call. I wonder if it's more, a crack in time where his loss reaches out, searching for someone to pull him from the deep, the whispering ruins of Glenmore. In the far reaches of the Scottish Highlands, where the wind howls through jagged peaks and mist clings to the valleys, lies Glenmore, a remote glen steeped in legend. Its rolling moors and crumbling stone walls are all that remain of a village abandoned centuries ago, its name whispered with caution by those in nearby hamlets. Locals speak of strange lights flickering among the ruins at dusk, and voices carried on the breeze, recounting tales of sorrow and loss. To outsiders, Glenmore is a place of haunting beauty. To those who know its history, it is a place where the past refuses to rest. In the autumn of 2017, Ewan Fraser, a history teacher from Aberdeen, ventured to Glenmore to research a book on forgotten Highland settlements. A practical man in his late 30s, Ewan dismissed the local superstitions as colorful folklore, attributing them to the isolation of the region. Armed with a notebook, a camera, and a map, he arrived at the glen on a crisp October morning, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and heather. The ruins were as he'd imagined, scattered stones marking the outlines of long-gone homes, a collapsed kirk, and a single intact archway, etched with faded Gaelic runes. As he sketched the archway, he felt a peculiar chill, though the sun was high and the wind still. By mid-afternoon, Ewan had explored most of the site, taking photos and jotting notes about the village's likely demise during the highland clearances. As he sat on a moss-covered stone to eat a sandwich, he noticed a faint sound, like a low murmur, rising from the direction of the kirk. Thinking it was the wind whistling through the broken walls, he ignored it and continued writing. But the sound grew clearer, resolving into what sounded like a man's voice, hoarse and pleading, though the words were indistinct. Curious but cautious, Ewan stood and approached the kirk, his boots sinking into the soft earth. Inside the roofless kirk, the air felt heavier, as if the ruins were holding their breath. The murmuring stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so profound it made Ewan's ears ring. He scanned the empty space, seeing only crumbling stones and patches of grass. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of movement near the altar, a shadow that seemed to shift against the light. Heart pounding, he raised his camera and snapped a photo, the flash illuminating the ruins. In that brief burst of light, he saw him, a man in tattered 18th century clothing, his face gaunt and streaked with dirt, kneeling at the altar with his hands clasped in desperation. The figure's eyes met Ewan's, wide with anguish, before the flash faded and the kirk returned to emptiness. Ewan stumbled back, his breath shallow. He checked his camera, but the photo showed only the altar, no trace of the figure. Convinced he'd imagined it, he tried to rationalize the experience, perhaps exhaustion or the power of suggestion from local tales. But as he turned to leave, the murmuring resumed, now accompanied by a woman's soft sobbing, echoing from the archway outside. Against his better judgment, Ewan followed the sound, his legs trembling. Under the archway, he saw nothing but felt an overwhelming wave of despair, as if the air itself carried the weight of unspeakable loss. Terrified, Ewan fled the glen, driving back to the nearest inn in a daze. That evening, over a pint, he confided in the innkeeper, a weathered woman named Morag, who'd lived in the area all her life. Hesitant at first, she shared the story of Glenmore's final days. In the 1790s, during the clearances, the village was forcibly emptied by landowners. A crofter named Lachlan, unable to bear leaving his ancestral home, defied the eviction orders. When soldiers came, Lachlan's wife, Elspeth, pleaded for mercy, but in the chaos, both were killed in the kirk, their bodies left among the ruins. Since then, locals claimed their grief lingered, their voices haunting the glen, heard only by those who lingered too long. Ewan returned to Aberdeen, shaken but determined to include Glenmore in his book. He developed his photos, hoping for evidence, but found only one anomaly. In the image of the archway, faint streaks of light formed the outline of two figures, one kneeling, one standing, though no such shapes were visible when he took the shot. He never returned to Glenmore, but the experience left him questioning his skepticism. Some say the glen's ruins hold an imprint of Lachlan and Elspeth's final moments, replaying their tragedy for those who tread too close. Others, including Ewan, wonder if the glen is a place where time frays, allowing the past to bleed into the present, a reminder of a sorrow that refuses to fade, the vanishing path of Blackthorn Moor. Nestled in the wilds of Northumbria, England, Blackthorn Moor stretches across a desolate expanse of heather and bog, where ancient standing stones cast long shadows under brooding skies. The moor is a place of whispered legends, its paths said to shift beneath the feet of unwary travelers. Locals in the nearby village of Hexham speak of walkers who strayed from the trails, only to return hours later with tales of lost time or glimpses of things that should not be. To most, the moor is a place to avoid after dusk, its eerie silence broken only by the cry of curlews and the rustle of unseen things in the bracken. In the summer of 2019, Clara Henshaw, a 29-year-old graphic designer from Newcastle, decided to hike Blackthorn Moor during a weekend retreat. An avid walker with a love for sketching landscapes, Clara was drawn to the moor's stark beauty and its reputation for mystery, which she dismissed as quaint superstition. Equipped with a backpack, a detailed map, and her sketchbook, she set out on a clear July morning, following a well-trodden path marked by weathered stones. The air was warm, scented with wildflowers, and the standing stones loomed like silent sentinels as she sketched their weathered surfaces. As noon approached, Clara noticed a narrow side path branching off into a copse of twisted blackthorn trees, unmarked on her map, but invitingly shaded. Curious and confident in her navigation skills, she followed it, expecting to loop back to the main trail. The path wound deeper into the moor, the trees growing denser, their gnarled branches blotting out the sun. After a few minutes, she stopped to check her watch. It read 12:15 p.m. But as she continued, the light dimmed unnaturally, and a chill settled over the moor, as if twilight had fallen in an instant. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees closing in, and Clara's map now showed no trace of the copse or the path she'd taken. Unease crept in, but Clara pressed on, hoping to find the main trail. Then she heard it, a faint hum, like a distant chant, rising from the ground itself. The sound grew into a rhythmic murmur, words in a language she couldn't place, both mournful and urgent. Her heart raced as she noticed a flicker of movement ahead, a line of shadowy figures, cloaked in rough wool, walking in single file along the path. They carried staffs and lanterns, their faces obscured, moving with a purpose that felt both ancient and sorrowful. Clara froze, clutching her sketchbook, as the figures passed within feet of her, their lanterns casting no light. She called out, but her voice was swallowed by the hum, and the figures neither turned nor paused. Terrified, Clara turned to flee, only to find the path behind her gone, replaced by an unbroken wall of blackthorn. Panic surged as she stumbled forward, following the figures, who vanished around a bend. When she reached the spot, the path abruptly ended at a clearing she hadn't seen before, dominated by a single standing stone carved with spirals. The hum ceased, and the air grew still. Clara checked her watch. It now read 6:45 p.m., though she felt only minutes had passed. Her phone showed no signal, but the timestamp on her last photo, taken at 12:10 p.m., confirmed she'd lost over 6 hours. Shaken, Clara retraced her steps, somehow finding the main trail again. She reached Hexham by nightfall, her sketchbook clutched tightly, though she couldn't recall drawing anything. At the village pub, she shared her story with an elderly barmaid, Agnes, who listened with a knowing nod. Agnes revealed that Blackthorn Moor was once a sacred site for a druidic sect, driven out in the 5th century during Christian purges. The sect's final ritual, a plea to their gods for protection, was said to have bound their spirits to the moor, their procession eternally retracing a path lost to time. Those who stumbled upon it, like Clara, were said to cross into their moment of exile, losing hours in a blink. Back in Newcastle, Clara developed her photos, expecting nothing unusual. But one image, taken at the standing stone, showed faint, translucent figures circling it, their lanterns glowing dimly. Figures she hadn't seen when she pressed the shutter. She never returned to Blackthorn Moor, but the hum lingered in her dreams, and her sketches from that day depicted a path she couldn't remember drawing. Some say the moor's paths are alive, shifting to ensnare the curious, replaying the druid's last march. Others, like Clara, wonder if the moor is a tier in time, where the past walks alongside the present, waiting for those who stray too far. Whispers. Outside the tent. A couple of summers ago, I went camping with 2 of my friends. We picked a remote spot, miles away from the nearest town, deep in the woods where you could barely get any cell service. It was supposed to be a weekend to disconnect. Just us, a campfire, and the stars overhead. The first night went exactly like we planned. We set up the tents, cooked over the fire, told stupid stories, and laughed until our voices echoed through the trees. It felt peaceful out there, isolated in the best way. The second night was different. The air had shifted, colder, heavier. Even the woods sounded different. The usual chorus of crickets and rustling leaves had fallen almost completely silent, like the forest was holding its breath. We tried to brush it off. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was just in our heads. By midnight, we crawled into our tents, zipped them up, and tried to sleep. I don't know how long I lay there, staring into the darkness of the tent, before I heard it. A whisper. At first, it was so soft I thought it was the wind, just a faint hissing, weaving between the trees. But as I listened, it became clearer, distinct words, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. I sat up, heart pounding, and strained to hear. It sounded like multiple voices, low, murmuring, moving around the camp. I unzipped the tent just an inch and peered out. The fire had burned down to nothing but embers. The woods beyond were pitch black. I couldn't see anyone, but the voices were there, circling, as if a group of people was walking slowly around us. I whispered to my friends, asked if they were hearing it too. One of them, Jake, muttered something about a bad dream and turned over. The other, Sam, didn't answer at all. Then I heard footsteps. Soft at first, like someone stepping carefully through the underbrush, getting closer, closer. Suddenly, something brushed against the side of my tent, just a light touch, like fingers running along the fabric. I froze, barely breathing. Another whisper, right outside the tent now. So close I could almost feel the breath behind it. Still no clear words, just the sickening feeling that whoever, or whatever, was out there, was trying to lure us out. I clenched my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. Some instinct told me not to, that if I showed any sign I was awake, they might come inside. I sat like that for what felt like hours, the whispers rising and falling, footsteps crunching in the dead leaves, circling, always just out of sight. Sometime just before dawn, the sounds faded. One by one, the voices drifted away, swallowed by the forest. The last thing I heard was a single drawn-out whisper right at the entrance to my tent, a word I finally understood. Come. When the sun finally rose, I stumbled outside. Jake and Sam were already packing, pale and shaking. They'd heard it too. We broke camp in record time and didn't speak much on the drive home. We never went back to those woods again. And even now, when the night is quiet and the wind picks up just right, I swear I can still hear those whispers, somewhere just beyond the trees. A night in the abandoned house in the woods. This happened to me a few years ago, in early autumn. I had decided to go camping alone, something I used to do often, just to clear my head. I picked a forest about an hour away from my town, a place I thought I knew well enough not to get into trouble. That afternoon, I parked my car at the trailhead and started hiking deeper into the woods. The trees were thick, their tops blocking most of the gray sky above. The air smelled of wet leaves and distant rain, and the further I walked, the quieter it became. No people, no animals, just me and the forest. I had planned to set up camp near a small clearing I knew about, but by the time I got close, it started to rain. First a drizzle, then heavier drops pattering on the ground. The clearing was already turning into a muddy mess. Setting up a tent there would have been miserable. As I looked around for shelter, I noticed something between the trees, a structure. At first, I thought it might be an old cabin. Curiosity got the better of me, and I made my way toward it. The building was unsettling. It looked ancient, the wood blackened by time, the roof sagging, windows either broken or missing entirely. I hesitated, standing there in the rain. The smart thing would have been to turn around, but the rain was picking up, and I told myself it was just an old house, nothing more. I pushed the door open with my foot. It groaned loudly, swinging inward into darkness. The smell inside was overwhelming. Mold, damp wood, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like rusted iron. I clicked on my flashlight. Dust floated in the beam, swirling lazily. The floorboards creaked under my boots as I moved inside. Every step echoed strangely, like the house itself was breathing around me. I found a room near the back. No windows, just solid walls, and decided it was the safest place to ride out the storm. I unrolled my sleeping bag on a relatively dry patch of floor, set down my backpack, and sat listening to the rain hammering the roof above me. For a while, everything was fine. The steady rhythm of rain was almost comforting. I even started to relax until I heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought it must have been the wind, or maybe an animal outside, but no. These were definite heavy steps, slow, measured, moving across the warped floorboards. I froze, straining to hear. They came closer, then stopped, right outside the room where I was sitting. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned off my flashlight, plunging myself into complete darkness. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Something scratched at the door, not like an animal pawing. It was deliberate. Fingernails, maybe, dragging slowly from top to bottom. Then silence. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. It felt like hours. When I finally dared to turn the flashlight back on, nothing was there. No one. Just the old, empty hallway, stretching into darkness. I stayed awake all night, listening to every creak, every whisper of the wind. When dawn finally came, pale and cold, I packed up my things as fast as I could and ran from that place. I tried to find that house again later, thinking maybe it had been some weird, abandoned landmark. But no matter how many times I searched those woods, it was gone. Like it had never been there at all. Voices on the recorder. It was a weekend hike, nothing unusual. I'd been on plenty of them before, so when my friend Mark suggested we take a quick trip to the mountains for the weekend, I didn't think twice. We were both avid hikers, and this trail was one of those lesser-known routes, the kind where you rarely encounter other people. We set out early in the morning. The air was crisp, and the sun had barely risen when we hit the trail. We made good progress, the path winding through dense forests before opening up to steep rocky outcrops. It felt peaceful, almost surreal. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be away from the chaos of daily life. At some point during the hike, we decided to stop for a break. We found a small clearing near a creek, and Mark pulled out a handheld recorder. It wasn't something we typically used, but Mark thought it'd be a fun way to document the trip. He started recording, joking about how much fun we were having, and how we'd probably get lost in the woods and never be seen again. We laughed, but something in his tone struck me as odd, almost uneasy. We took a few more pictures, shared some snacks, and then continued on. It wasn't until we made camp later that evening, just as the sky turned dark, that Mark pulled out the recorder again. He played back the earlier recordings, laughing at our dumb jokes, but when he pressed play for the last clip, I froze. I didn't recognize it at first. There was no context, no laughter, just whispering. Quiet at first, like a distant hum. Then, unmistakably, a voice, harsh and raspy, like it was coming from deep within the earth itself. "Get out," it whispered, barely audible, but clear enough for me to hear. I laughed it off, thinking it was some weird feedback from the recorder or interference from the wind. But then the voice came again, louder this time and clearer. "Leave now." I felt a chill run down my spine. Mark was already hitting the rewind button, playing the same part over again. The voice was still there, but there was more now. Footsteps, faint but unmistakable, as if someone had been walking near us the entire time we were sitting by the creek. We both fell silent. It was unnerving, especially since the recorder had been lying on the ground the entire time, right next to us. There was no one else around, just the two of us in the middle of nowhere. Mark shrugged it off at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I told him I wasn't comfortable staying out there for the night, that the forest felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. But Mark just laughed again, dismissing it as paranoia. That night, we took turns keeping watch. I kept hearing noises from the trees, branches snapping, the sound of footsteps circling the camp. But every time I shined my flashlight toward the noise, there was nothing there. Just shadows, stretching unnaturally in the moonlight. The next morning, we packed up and headed back down the trail, trying to laugh off the weirdness of the night before. But something was different. The woods felt off. The air seemed heavier, like it was pressing down on us. Every turn in the trail felt like we were being watched. When we finally reached the parking lot, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't until we were back home that I decided to check the recorder again. I didn't even have to press play. The moment I turned it on, I heard it. A low hum, followed by a voice, clearer than ever before. Stay away. It wasn't just a warning, it was a command. I tried to erase the recordings, but they wouldn't delete. I reformatted the device, but every time I checked, the files were there. Always on the same day, always that same voice. It was almost like something was following me, reminding me that I had crossed into a place I shouldn't have been. I haven't gone back to those mountains since. I don't even go near any forests now. Every time I hear a strange noise at night or see a shadow move in the corner of my eye, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was on that recorder is still watching. And sometimes I hear that same voice, clear as day, echoing in my head. Stay away. The ember glow of Raven's Tor. High in the Pennine Hills of northern England, Raven's Tor rises like a somber sentinel over the windswept dales of Derbyshire. Its craggy summit, crowned with a circle of weathered stones, is a place of whispered dread, where the air carries the faint tang of smoke, even on clear days. Locals in the village of Edale speak of a fire that burns without fuel, seen only by those who linger too long at dusk. Tales tell of shepherds who glimpsed flames atop the Tor, only to find cold stone, and of hikers who felt an oppressive heat that left no mark. To outsiders, Raven's Tor is a rugged landmark. To those who know its lore, it is a place where a forgotten tragedy smolders still. In the autumn of 2021, Sarah Bennett, a 27-year-old photographer from Sheffield, trekked to Raven's Tor to capture its stark beauty for a local art exhibition. A self-described skeptic with a passion for moody landscapes, Sarah brushed off the village's warnings as quaint folklore, eager to shoot the stone circle against the setting sun. She arrived in the late afternoon, her camera bag slung over her shoulder, the moorland air crisp and tinged with heather. The Tor loomed above, its stones etched with faint, spiraling patterns she assumed were natural weathering. As she set up her tripod, the wind carried a distant crackle, like twigs snapping underfoot. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows, Sarah noticed a faint glow pulsing at the center of the stone circle, like embers catching in a breeze. Thinking it was a trick of the light, she adjusted her camera, but the glow intensified, accompanied by a low, rhythmic thrum, as if the earth itself were breathing. Curious but wary, she approached, her boots crunching on gravel. The air grew warm, unnaturally so, and the crackle sharpened into the roar of a fire, though no flames were visible. Her camera's viewfinder flickered, showing a haze of orange where the glow should be, and a faint smell of charred wood filled her lungs. At the circle's edge, Sarah froze. The glow erupted into a spectral blaze, flames licking the stones without consuming them, illuminating a scene within the circle. Shadowy figures, clad in coarse 17th century garb, huddled around a pyre. A woman stood at the center, her hands bound, her face contorted in silent agony as the flames seemed to engulf her. The figures watched, their expressions a mix of fear and resolve, their lips moving in unison, chanting words Sarah couldn't hear. She snapped a photo, the flash blinding, and the vision vanished. The flames, the figures, the pyre, all gone, leaving only cold stones and a lingering heat on her skin. Trembling, Sarah fled down the tor, the thrum fading behind her. In Edale, she sought out the village historian, an elderly woman named Edith, at the local library. Over tea, Edith shared a grim tale. In 1665, during the Great Plague, a healer named Marjorie was accused of witchcraft by panicked villagers. Fearing her remedies spread the disease, they burned her atop Raven's Tor, her cries silenced by the flames. The village buried the act, but the Tor, locals claimed, kept Marjorie's final moments alive, its fire flaring for those who tread too close. Edith warned that seeing the pyre meant bearing its pain, a burden Sarah now carried. Back in Sheffield, Sarah developed her photos, her hands shaking. One image, taken at the circle, showed a faint ring of flames and a woman's silhouette, though her camera had captured only stones moments before. She withdrew from the exhibition, unable to face the Tor's image. The crackle of fire haunted her dreams, and she swore she felt its heat on quiet nights. Some say Raven's Tor holds Marjorie's agony, its flames a testament to her unjust death. Others, like Sarah, wonder if the Tor is a wound in time, where a single night's horror burns eternal, waiting for eyes to bear its witness. And so, wanderers of the night, our tale dissolves into the shadows. The echoes of this story linger softly, like a whisper on the wind, carrying you deeper into the embrace of dreams. Rest now, beneath the watchful stars, and let the stillness cradle you until the dawn. Sleep well, my friends, until the next tale calls you back. Good night.